Warm welcome to this lecture series on organizational behavior. We are in this chapter on interpersonal behavior at work. This is the third section of the lecture in this chapter. I'll quickly summarize what happened in the previous lectures. We defined what is interpersonal behavior. We also looked at a very important concept called psychological contract. Psychological contracts are nothing but unwritten expectations or agreement between two parties in a relationship. We also looked at the different forms of psychological contract in workplace, namely transactional contract and relational contract. We also looked at trust as a important element in interpersonal relationship. We also looked at what is trust and different forms of trust. We also looked at how to build trust in relationships. So if you are an individual in a relationship, how to build trust in this relationship. This is a very important aspect of building relationship. So this we discussed for some time in the previous lecture. We also looked at pro-social behavior. Pro-social behavior means positive social behavior or behaviors which help society in a positive way. We looked at a very specific framework called organizational citizenship behavior, which is studied extensively in organizational context. So we looked at the 5 dimensions of organizational citizenship behavior. We also looked at other forms or other ways of looking at pro-social behavior in workplace, namely extra role performance, contextual performance, and things like that. We also looked at what are the ways in which we can improve pro-social behavior in workplace. So we looked at the problems in using purely money as a motivator to increase pro-social behavior, and also ways like recognition and appreciation as ways to improve pro-social behavior in workplace. We also looked at cooperation, the definition of cooperation and how it is different from competition. We also looked at cooperation in the organizational context and why it is very important, and also individual differences in people which contribute to the way they handle interdependencies in relationship. So both cooperation and competition, there is interdependency between two individuals, but in cooperation the individuals interpret it as an opportunity to collaborate and win-win together. But in a competitive situation or in a competitive scenario, the same task interdependence is perceived to be something which leads to competition between two people, or in other words, people perceive this task interdependency as a win-lose situation. So the same situation of interdependence can lead to either competition or cooperation. So one factor which decides whether a person will interpret a situation as a competitive situation or a cooperative situation is personal characteristics. So we looked at some of the personal characteristics and also how people can be categorized based on their style of handling interpersonal relationships. Okay, so this is what we saw in the previous lectures. In this particular session, we are going to look at conflict and how to manage conflict. Conflict is a very inherent part of human relationships. So if there is interdependency, there is always a risk of conflict, and especially when the relationships are close, especially in close relationships, there are high chances conflicts will happen, because in close relationships there is a need for depending on each other. So there is a need to trust, there is a need to take that risk. So if that risk is too high, or if because of some situation people perceive that interdependency as a competitive situation, it can lead to conflicts. So conflict, you cannot avoid conflict, but you need to understand how to manage conflict effectively. So in very simple terms, conflict can be defined as disagreement between two individuals or two parties. So people don't agree or people don't accept each other's stance. So it can be between two individuals or it can be between two groups. For example, conflict can happen between two states or two countries, two political parties or two individuals, so two ideologies. So conflict is not necessarily between individuals. Conflicts can happen between groups also. This happens because they disagree on something, and many a times there is some level of interdependency, like I said earlier. So there is an expectation or there is a difference in the way people look at the situation, so that can lead to conflict. So why do conflict happen? No, conflicts many a times happens because of superficial reasons or reasons which should not lead to conflict. For example, individual differences. So the basic premise of psychology is each individual is different. So if each individual is different in terms of the way they look at things, the way they behave, the way they understand the world around them, the way they form attitudes, we assume that this is the only way the world can exist, or this is the only way things should be perceived, or this is the only truth. So this individual differences leads to this kind of a bubble. You are a different person from the other person, but we believe we all are similar and everybody should think the way I should think. Okay, so if each one of them think like that, if each one of us feel I am the center of the universe and whatever I perceive and whatever I understand is correct, and if we encounter someone who differ from us, it will lead to disagreement. Okay, so but if you understand the fact that we all are different and perception is subjective, there is nothing like absolute truth, the friction or disagreement reduces. You understand what I think is not always correct, and the other person might think in some other way. The same thing, the other person might perceive it in different way. If you understand that reality, conflict may not happen. It is as simple as that. But many times we fail to understand this reality or fail to understand this truth. In fact, the only truth is there is no one truth. Okay, and everybody looks at world in their own way and everybody thinks that is the only truth. If you understand this, many times conflicts can be resolved. A second important reason can be incompatible needs. So I may need something from a particular scenario, but the other person may need something else. Okay, for example, sharing water resources. So one state or one country will expect more water because its hydroelectric power depends on that particular river. Okay, the other party or other country may want more water because it has more irrigational area. Okay, so there are incompatible needs. Needs doesn't match. So it can also lead to conflicts. Perceptions, like I said earlier, each one of us perceive the same thing differently. So I may insist that I am correct. The other person will insist that he or she is correct. So this can lead to conflict. There is no common agreement or there is no common understanding of the situation. So that can lead to conflicts. Values. Values means what I think as important, the other person may not think the same. Okay, I may think hard work is important, but the other person might think no, smart work is important. I don't need to spend too many hours in studying this. If I know the important questions which may come in the exam, if I read only that, I will get 80% or 60%. But I will feel no, it's not about examination. I need to understand, read, hard work. So I may not judge the other person based on my value system. I may think, see, that the other person is taking shortcut which is wrong, but the other person might think this person doesn't know how to work smartly. Okay, so these differences in what we think is important can lead to problems or conflicts. beliefs are varied. So I may believe something to be true, the other person may believe that to be false. Okay, I may believe in God, the other person may not believe in God. I may believe in existence of karma or previous birth, but other person may not believe in that. Okay, so these differences can also lead to conflicts. Cultural differences, simple things like food habits or life habits or value system, value changes because of cultural differences, all those things can lead to conflicts in terms of perception differences and value differences. Sometimes in organizational context, the way in which the job is designed itself can lead to conflict. If the job design is such a way that people are forced to compete with each other, it may lead to competition. Or the jobs are designed in the way that the organizational structure leads to power power disparity or power, one person has more power, another person has less power, or one person gets more resources, other person gets less resources. Because of the way the jobs are designed, it can lead to conflict. So conflicts can be of various reasons. Many a times these reasons can be handled just by understanding we all are different and our perceptions can vary. Okay. Conflicts are of many types. Like I said earlier, conflict is between two people or two groups, but sometimes conflict can happen within individuals also. So intrapersonal conflict means conflict within an individual. You are fighting with your own self. Okay. So when will we fight within our own self? If you remember, I was talking about cognitive dissonance in attitude chapter. So cognitive dissonance means two different thoughts extremely opposite to each other existing in the same time. So that can lead to confusion and conflict within us. So intrapersonal conflict means these kind of conflicts. Role conflict can also be an intrapersonal conflict. There are conflicting roles. You are a parent, at the same time you are also teacher for your child. Your friend is also your subordinate. So those kind of situations can lead to conflict within our own self. Interpersonal conflict is conflict between two people. Intra-group conflict means conflict within a group. For example, let's say there is a team. The team members may fight within each other. So that is intra-group conflict. Intergroup conflict means conflict between two groups. Like I said, conflict between two states, two countries, two sports team and things like that. Okay. So in organizational context, all these forms of conflicts can exist. So within an organization, an individual might be confused about what is right, what is wrong, conflicting ideas, and that can lead to cognitive dissonance. Also, the same person will have conflict with the other person in the department. Two departments can fight. Even within the department, there can be fight. So conflicts can happen at all levels within the organization. Okay. So in terms of conflicts, the earlier slide spoke about different levels, conflicts existing at different groups, different individuals. So in this slide, we are going to talk about types of conflict. In terms of nature of conflict, it can vary. So what do we mean by that? What causes conflict? Okay. So relational conflict is in terms of disagreement on a personal or a social level. Okay. For example, I may like a political leader, but my friend may not like that person. He may disagree with that political ideology. Or I may like a particular food, the other person may not like it. I may look at a particular behavior as a bad behavior, but another person will look at it as a normal behavior. Okay. So these are relational conflict. In workplace, it can happen because of bias or prejudice or stereotyping. Okay. Or maybe even because of true reasons. People are different in nature, so they don't understand each other. That can lead to conflict. That is relational conflict. Task conflict means disagreement about work. It's not about I don't like you, you don't like me. So that is relational conflict. I don't like you, you don't like me, or I don't like the way you think, you don't like the way I understand things. That is relational conflict. Task conflict means disagreement about the work, how to achieve the goal. So there is a particular project, one person may think, no, we need to approach it like this. Another person may say, no, we need to start with another approach. So understanding of how to do things may vary. So that can lead to task conflict. Process conflict is disagreement in terms of planning or sharing responsibilities. Okay, so which is similar to task conflict. In task conflict, people don't disagree to how to do that or what is the work. Process conflict is disagreement in terms of planning, execution, who should share more responsibilities or who should have more resources, all those differences in terms of ideas. So this can lead to process conflict. So relational conflict many times can be resolved at the individual level. When people understand that these differences are superficial, these differences tend to exist, individual differences, then they can resolve relational conflict. Task conflict and process conflict many times can be resolved by organizational intervention. When I say organizational intervention, how will you avoid task conflict? One way organizations can help is have clear-cut prescriptions in terms of how to fulfill a task, okay, or what is the task, definition of the task. So if everything is formally written down, people may not have disagreements. There is a manual, you can refer it and okay, this is the way we have to do this and this is the goal. Okay. Similarly, process documents. Many organizations have standards in terms of processes. Everything is like clearly written down, process manual. So if you have clear-cut process manual, there is a yardstick to measure what is right, what is wrong, which method one should adapt. So if there is a confusion, you can go there and look at it and get answers for your questions in terms of how to do it, and disagreements may not exist. Okay, like I said, relational conflict is individual level. Sometimes it can be group level also. It can lead individual differences slowly becomes group differences, and people tend to take sides in terms of their regional, people with the same regional background, language background, or maybe caste background, gender background, religious background. So slowly these relational conflict can become group conflicts also. So how to avoid that? One way organizations can intervene is make people understand these individual differences are superficial, and also create a culture where people are tolerant to other cultures or other value systems. Like I said earlier in one of the chapters, diversity management. Create an environment where people are okay with different opinions, different cultures, different value systems. It's not just about okay with, they should also embrace, they should also experiment in understanding others, cultures, values, perceptions and things like that. So like in India, unity in diversity. India is also a country where there are so many languages, so many religions, so many ethnic backgrounds. But in spite of all these differences, we try to appreciate those differences. In fact, when organizations use this diversity as a positive mechanism, it will help organizations become more creative. So what I mean to say is, there are differences between people in terms of the cultural background and social background. If you don't handle those differences well, it can lead to conflict. But let's say if you handle those differences well, if you really manage it well, make people understand these differences will exist, and you need to understand the beauty of the other culture and other value system, it can lead to creative work environment. These organizations which are diverse in terms of people's background are more innovative and creative, provided we manage them well. So I'll stop here because in the next section we will talk about managing the conflict and ways in which we can approach conflict. Till then, take care. We'll see you in the next lecture.